Welcome to Shorty SuperCoach and welcome to another JLT Community Series wrap-up. We're going to take a look at all the matches across the weekend, and in fact they started back at Wednesday. So just put a few names on the radar, a few guys we might be wanting to think about or already have been thinking about, and hopefully give you something to talk about and discuss in terms of selection. So Carlton and St Kilda, Blues got the job done by 22 points. Paddy Cripps was certainly one guy who stood out as a class above many. 20 touches, 2 goals. The stats didn't exactly scream off the sheet of paper, but he was extremely impressive and just looked like everything we wanted him to. He looked fit, he was looking good, so I think a lot of people have him locked and loaded, and that's fair enough too. Paddy Dow, 13 touches and 2 goals from your 63% game time. Of course, he was Carlton's first pick in the draft and showed exactly why. Being touted as perhaps the best clearance player from that draft, and there's certainly an available spot in that Carlton midfield which is fairly weak. So I think he just showed enough. You know, it certainly wasn't by weight of numbers, but just seemed to find a way to the right spot. Just beautiful clearance work, which we know. I know there was that one out of the centre where he just broke away and then just hit a guy on the chest. You know, just you want to take just a couple of things away from a young player like that, and it just gives you enough signs to go, yeah, he looks like he's going to be a quality player. And of course we can pick him up. I think it's around 180, 190k in midfield, and looks like a guy who could be a player who sees plenty of matches in his first year. Cade Simpson, 16 touches. A lot of people have him on the radar. I'm not 100% on board. I think he's a fairly safe pick. I think you can probably lock in a early 90s average. I'm not so sure it's going to be a full Doherty replacement. I think he might play that similar role where he is the exit man, but I don't necessarily think we'll just naturally see his numbers go back to the high 90s. I do think Cade's in the twilight of his career, so I'm not 100% on board, but he did show signs that he was going to be the running man from the back line. Caleb Marchbank, 25 touches, get him at 381k, and he was probably one of the more impressive Blues, that's for sure. Really conducted the back line nicely and is the sort of defender that is big but finds a bit of the ball. Now, I wouldn't be getting sucked into this one. I mean, I think you just see a couple of people mention his name and you go, oh, let's not get sucked into JLT form, guys. I mean, if you're even thinking about him as a guy who might be, Michael Hurley-esque as a tall defender who racks up the ball, let's not get carried away. I don't think we should be getting on board. Aaron Mullett, 440k, another guy that's been discussed as a potential player who could be a rebounding defender for the Blues. Doherty going, that opens that role up. 14 touches, I'm not so sure. I think he's in that category of a guy that we need to see a fair bit from. You know, showed reasonable signs at North Melbourne, capable of averaging around the 80s. Will he step up with this new club? Better role? I wouldn't have thought so. And even if there was a little bit of hope, we needed to see a fair bit more on Wednesday night. So I think anyone who was monitoring him probably would have put a little cross next to the name and certainly a bit of concern there, but I don't think he's overly popular. Moving on to the Saints, there's a bit of interest there. Certainly a few players that prick the ears up. Jack Stephen, 24 touches, 14 contested, 6 clearances. Really looked good. Really enjoyed what he did. Look back to some of his best stuff. Personally, he's not quite for me at the moment. I don't feel, my personal opinion, I don't feel his ceiling will be enough for me. And just a slight concern, maybe a little bit gut feel, because I know he's done, what did he do, 110 at one point in time. I'm not sure I see him going there again, but the signs were promising. Shane Savage, 21 touches, 15 kicks. You know, a bit of excitement about him being a rebounding defender. And look, he could be unique. I mean, I probably couldn't sit here and endorse it, but then again, I've probably been on board a couple of different types in the back line. So if you're wanting to take a bit of a POD and a slight risk, he does have those attributes. You know, they like the ball in his hand. He's a very nice kick and can run and carry the ball, and has shown that he can produce some good numbers within seasons. I haven't got the stats in front of me, but he has shown signs at certain stages that even if it's over a 6-week period, he can average in the 90s. So he was food for thought. And David Armitage is certainly one. 24 touches, the bulk of those contested, 8 clearances. he certainly put himself front of mind. Now, you know my thoughts. I've done a player profile on him. I don't see him getting anywhere near my side. I think he's making a slight transition to more of a forward line role. He will get more midfield time, that's for sure, but I do probably see him drifting a little bit more towards a David Mundy style of role. You know, there's nothing wrong with him as a player and he still adds value, but I probably see him averaging around your 85-ish mark. Is that going to be enough for you? Well, I'm not sure. But look, you know, there was a few Saints out. You know, I know Billings was out and there was probably a couple others that might play a similar role, but if you want an in-depth chat about Armitage, check out the player profile. And Nick Caulfield, of course, the young man, I think he was the Saints' second pick, was he? Was Hunter Clark first, and then he wasn't far behind. But look, 20 touches, 171k in our backline and our midfield, and he was one guy that certainly showed plenty of promise. And look, I think he'll have to be in the mix. The Saints would have definitely liked what they saw. Flip the page over, the Giants and Collingwood. Now, the Giants absolutely spanked the Pies, and gee, did the radio lines go off the next day. It doesn't take too much for Pies fans to get on the blower and have a fair bit to say, but not an ideal start to the pre-season, but probably wouldn't be jumping the ship just yet. But look, the Giants did look pretty smooth. Dylan Shield, 29 touches. He's a man that, as you know, if you've tuned into this channel for a long time, I've pumped him up at certain stages, and in fact, I think 2 years ago I started him. I think I really felt he could explode. And again, he's got those potential makings. He always feels to me like he's a guy who at some point in his career is going to have an unbelievable season. You know, at some point. Will it be this year? Your guess is as good as mine. Only 4 of those touches were contested. He's a running beast and a powerful athlete, but look, I don't think we could be going towards him. He'd be pretty bold. Josh Kelly, 24 touches. He did everything right, you know, pretty much what you expect, you know, nothing unbelievable from him, but just a smooth-moving fella and a guy that has made his way into my side, which I'll probably discuss further tomorrow. Stephen Coniglio, he's the big one. 28 touches, 13 contested, 7 clearances, and he's priced at 452k in our midfield. Plenty of discussion about him. I reckon of all the players I've talked about, the views on him are just about as divided and intricate in discussion as you could get. Just that price in our midfield, so tricky. You know, I know in the player profile I did say it's a no for me, and I do stand by that. I just think while he is capable of averaging big numbers, I'm not sure if it's going to be enough to be a keeper. And at 450k, I think I would need that. But look, that performance on the weekend certainly showed enough that he is looking good. He's come back well. He's the big man in the midfield for the Giants. You know, Callan Ward still playing good footy, but I think the contested boy in that midfield is now Coniglio. So if you're really liking his prospects, he could be a guy that's at M6 for you, maybe M5, that just really produces 100 plus. Because I see him averaging 100 plus. What that plus is actually will be the question. Is it 105? Is it 109? Is it 102? Because those difference in points could make it or break it, because if you do go with him, you're probably sacrificing either a premium, a genuine premium, or you're sacrificing a genuine cash cow and 200-300k elsewhere. So that's the debate you got to weigh up. So food for thought. Heath Shaw, 22 touches, and in typical Shaw fashion, 20 kicks. Still not getting sucked in. I'm off him. I'm not going with him. There'll be a lot of people who do. Did I like the role he was playing, and did I really think about it? Yeah, I did. I was watching it as I chewed down a bit of pizza at Town and Country, and I thought, gee, he's playing that role where the Giants just feed it to him, get it in Heath's hands, you dish it out, you know, largely uncontested, but just handball received, short kick, effective kick, a lot of that. But I'm just not sure. No pun intended there, actually. That was a full mistake. But I don't know about him. I'm just concerned. He's got that glimmer of hope about him, but again, I just like a few of his younger counterparts a little bit more in that back line. I think there's some better options The likes of Salem I like a bit more. A few other types where they're on the up and they're flying in an upward direction. And I feel as if Shaw, while he may boost his numbers a little bit, and I'd expect him to, I just feel like in terms of his career, he's on that downward slope. And I hate sort of playing guys where I'm just not sure whether it's going to be their last year or what have you. So he's definitely one to think about, and one we'll be watching fairly closely in JLT2. Dawson Simpson, 12 touches, 11 hit-outs. Look, a lot of talk about him doing the bulk of the ruck, and I just couldn't see it happening. Well, he might do the bulk of the ruck, but I couldn't see him being a good SuperCoach options. I think there's quality ruckman to be had, and the mid-price option in the ruck just is fraught with danger as far as I'm concerned. If it goes wrong, you're in absolute strife. There's just so little options in the ruck division to sideways trade to. So if it goes wrong early, it's just a massive risk. And unless Simpson beats the door down, you know, he's an AFL journeyman. I could see him doing a reasonable job, you know, Jonathan Giles style, just coming in and doing okay. But to start him, you'd be pretty brave, and I'm not sure when Lob's coming back. Is it first 3 or 4 weeks? He might miss. I haven't actually checked the exact injury list for him, but you'd be a pretty brave man to go with Simpson. Jeremy Finlayson, or what have I? Finlayson is probably the correct way to say it. Finlayson, 14 touches, and was one of the more impressive Giants. And look, he's cheap as chips. We can lock him in, and I think he'll be in many people's backlines, and fair enough too. Lockie Keefe, 8 touches, and look, he played a fair amount of the game. I just think that's probably where he's at as a player. He's never going to rack up the ball, and perhaps those two may fit in the round one side. I'd say probably just one would, but look, I would say Finlayson's the man we'd be looking at for sure. Keefe, maybe if he gets named, you can put him in our forward line, because there does seem to be a lot less forward line options in that rookie line of thinking. Over to the Pies, and look, there wasn't too much, to be honest. I mean, I was looking at Grundy versus Cox. You know, Grundy 29 hit-outs, Cox 4. I think that's how it's going to go. Cox is definitely going to be mainly forward, an option in attack, part of that offensive 6, and he'll just give him a chop out, Grundy. I just don't see them sharing it. I think these days you're often going to have a key forward that does a little bit of rucking from time to time, but I don't see them sharing it in the terms of 30-70 or 40-60. I'm thinking 85-15 or 90-10. I really think at this point in time it is Grundy's spot, and Cox is where they're going to trial him as a key forward. Otherwise, look, Pendlebury wasn't great. Probably didn't fill us with a stack of confidence. Young Stevenson, you know, ran around, looked reasonable. You know, he gets a bit of game time and things like that. Callum Brown's a left field one, maybe more for your SuperCoach draft. 224k midfield forward, 19 touches, 4 clearances. I didn't mind his work. I think he's a bit of a left field one, but food for thought. And gee, how am I going to pronounce this one? Brody Mahacek. I've probably butchered that, but 102k, 14 touches, and he had some big roles. You know, played on some of the Giants' key players, key forwards, and I think he could be the type of fella who potentially could slot into that back line for the Pies, but he certainly did his chances plenty of help, because he was fairly impressive and could be a guy who's definitely in the mix for round one, which would be handy given his price. Bulldogs and Hawthorn out at Ballarat, which we obviously covered off pretty nicely. The Dogs got home by 22 points, and Bont looked fantastic. Marcus Bontempelli looked outstanding, 25 touches, and just looked so good. You know, sometimes it's not always about the numbers, and just watching him, he just looked, you know, in control, not really busting his guard or getting too many gears going, but he's just cruising around, looking good. I think he's a really nice selection. Aaron Norton, another guy, Doggy's high pick, 166k, 13 touches, 5 marks, 2 of those contested. And I must say, I'm looking to slot him into my backline, I think, because he really was impressive. And if he's in the mix for round one, or not even in the mix, if he's named, you know, Dale Morris is out, I think he's the sort of guy who could play most games and is good enough and reads to play well enough that can just churn you out 70s and 80s. I think he's a reasonable option. Luke Dalhouse is one. I should probably do a player profile on him, to be honest. Really interesting. 16 touches, 4 clearances, 9 contested possessions, Statistically, there wasn't too much wrong. Maybe you'd want a little bit more quantity, but the 5 kicks, 11 handballs really concerns me. And I must say, I had Dalhouse in my side. It was Billings, got injured, trade in Dalhouse. Off the back of watching him and getting okay numbers, I've put Billings back in. He concerns me, Dalhouse. I think he attended plenty of centre bounces. He got a few clearances. He was in there a bit, but just watching the whole Doggies makeup, there's just such a flow and rolling of different guys through that forward line. You know, it's Libber, it's Dunkley, it's Dalhouse, it's all these smalls and a lot of guys rotating through. There was such an unknown when I watched that. You know, just they want to play small, and I just got the sense that while Dalhouse will get midfield time, he's certainly going to be part of that rotation through the forward line. And I'm just not sure he's a good enough guy forward to be dynamic enough in SuperCoach. I just think his bread and butter is at the bottom of the pack, feeding it out clearance-wise. And I think for him to be a good pick, he needs to be doing that the majority of the game. It concerns me because when he goes forward, I just don't see him, having watched him forward a bit of last year as well, I don't see him being extremely dangerous. I'm just not sure whether he's going to be a viable option. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on him. Let me know as a Doggies fan too, if you think he can be a real good option as a forward, but we know it hindered his scoring last year. So he did exit my team, I must say. I watched him and just had a little bit of concern. Just that 5 kicks, 11 handballs, that ratio just is not friendly to SuperCoach. Hawthorn, well, Tommy Mitchell does what he does. 30 touches, 16 contested possessions. Clearances would have been impressive, but he wasn't far off. He racked up 10 of those as well, and he'll be, again, right up there in the overall points and a very reliable option. Jaeger O'Meara, 16 touches, 2 clearances. Was good without being great, but I think for a bloke like him, that's pretty much all the club would have wanted. Get through unscathed. Maybe as SuperCoaches, we maybe wanted a bit more, but I think he's probably shown enough to certainly stay in your team at the moment if you've got him, and just see how he goes in the next game. You probably want him to click into an extra gear next time around just to really fill you with confidence. James Sicily, 24 touches, 6 marks, 2 of those contested and 8 rebound 50s. He has got to be in consideration, and to be honest, I'm sort of umming and ahhing about bringing him in because I really think like he's in a SuperCoach friendly role. And while he doesn't maybe have the quantity in his touches, 24 is handy, but he's not going to be sort of your lead type who racks up a lot of sort of cheapish ball, you know, needs about 30-odd touches to get 100. Sicily gets enough intercept marks, and he's a kicker as well. He gets enough of that he only needs your 20 to 25 to belt out a 90 to 110. So that's really promising. I player profiled him the other day, so take a look at that. Take a bit more of a closer look at some of his numbers at the back end of last year, which makes for some pretty nice reading. David Mirra, just 3 touches off 23% time on ground. It looks like there'll be a role in that back line for him, but he didn't get a great opportunity on the weekend, which maybe suggests he's slightly on the outer in terms of selection. But I've got a mate at work who's a real keen Hawthorn man, and he tells me that he will be thoroughly in the mix, and he's been around Hawthorn for a long time, you know, dominated Box Hill. He's a mature age. I think he's certainly one that'll be popular, and I feel like if he can get a bit more time on ground in the second match, then he could be a bloke who lines up round 1. Brisbane versus Sydney. Now, there's a few names for the Lions, but I'm not sure how many will actually end up in our sides. But Stephen Martin really was dominant. 21 touches, 12 contested, 26 hitouts, 7 clearances. And that's what he can do. You know, when he is a solo man, he finds plenty of the ball around the ground. Contested ball, one of the best follow-up ruckmen in the game, and could be a handy point of difference for your side. Alan Christensen, 16 touches, just the 1 clearance, poor disposal efficiency of 44%, but concerned. I'm a little bit concerned. I wanted to see him roll through that midfield a little bit more, and I saw him have a lot of starting position forward of the ball, which I know Bundy can play quite well. I know he can play that position fairly well, but at 267 or whatever it is, he's around that mark, I just wanted to see midfield minutes, because I know he's been touted for a long time as a guy who can be a very good midfielder. I just don't want to see him hemmed in as that forward line guy who is in the lower end of the pecking order for that midfield rotation. That would concern me, because I really want him to be a midfielder, and I'm not sure he's going to be, because the Brisbane Lions have a fairly strong midfield. So my concern with him being a smallish forward in a poor team, I can just, again, it's sort of gut feel, but when I watched that, I was sort of just envisioning inconsistency in his scoring and 70s and the odd 90 when he has a good game. But I just think when you're a midfielder, your scoring is in your own hands, because you're at the source. That's where it starts. You dictate it. Where sometimes if you're a forward, you cannot necessarily play badly yourself, but you're just dried up of opportunity, or just it wasn't your day. You couldn't get the right spots in a team that got thumped, something like that. So I have my concerns. I'm umming and ahhing about dropping him. I know it's only off the back of one game, but I just wanted to see a bit more midfield time, and I didn't see that, and I don't like having mid prices, so just something that I was thinking about. Reece Matheson, 16 touches, 9 contested, 4 clearances. Really like him, and I think SuperCoach draft, he could be an absolute smoky. I think you'd be pretty brave to go with him in SuperCoach Classic, but he's almost a guy you'd weigh up against Sicily as well. They're about the same price, but Matheson, I think, is definitely going to have a spike in his numbers. How much it goes up? Well, that's the question, isn't it? I definitely see him pushing 90, and I feel he's capable of mid-90s. If I was guessing, I'd be looking at probably 88 to 91 sort of average. I think we'll see a reasonable step up, but I still think he could probably tidy up on his disposal, and he is largely a contested man. Still probably needs to work on that spread and find a bit more easy ball. He certainly doesn't magnetise to him. He doesn't find as much cheap ball, but we'll wait and see how he evolves his game. Hugh McCluggage, 14 touches, 6 tackles. Again, mark him down for your SuperCoach draft. I think he could be a real handy one in the latter stages. Alex Witherden probably didn't set the world on fire, 12 touches. A few people looking at him as maybe a left field option in the back line. I'd probably be steering clear. Cam Rayner, just the 5 touches from 61% time on ground for the number 1 pick, and he'll be in the mix. But again, that Brisbane midfield, it's certainly the strongest part of their game, and they do bat fairly deep. So I wouldn't envision, even though he is an in and under bull, and that's what he's known as for his under 18 stuff, but I wouldn't be seeing too much of that in his first year. We'll see that in time, but at the moment he'll be largely a small forward, half forward flanker. Tom Bell, 17 touches, 6 clearances from just half the game, which is extremely impressive. So he's got to be one we think about. And look, I talked about Christensen. Well, Tom Bell looks to have that midfield role very much his own. He's at 287, and he's got to be one we consider. Has averaged 89 before, been really cruelled by injuries of late, and he's got to be a guy that we take a look at. And Jack Payne, 117k in our back line, 11 touches, a guy to keep an eye on. Probably not going to be a huge scorer, but we do have a few options down back. But look, he might be one that might be worth considering. Sydney, JPK was outstanding in the Swans, 55-point win, 25 touches, 10 contested, and plenty of clearances as he does. Again, I think he's a really nice option around that sort of cheaper premium line of thinking. Of course, was one of many Swans who had a bit of a slower portion through the season last year, where they ebbed and flowed at times. Interestingly, start of the year was okay. He actually sort of had a bit of a slower patch 3/4 of the way through. But, if you want, or if you think he can get back up to 110, which he's done fairly regularly, he showed exactly what he can do on the weekend. Jake Lloyd, 26 touches. You guys know I'm a pretty good fan of him. He's in my side at the moment. Buddy Franklin, 15 touches, 4 goals. Again, dominated early particularly, and he'll be one we've got to consider. James Rose, 11 touches. I think he's about 127k in our forward lines. Certainly keep an eye on him. Played reasonable, looked lively. Callum Mills, 18 touches, 59% time on ground. Finds the ball very nicely. Just the one contested possession. That's quite interesting. I think he'd be too risky. There's a few better options lurking around that price. And while there's a bit of noise around him and a bit of hype, I'd be more inclined to go with some of those other players there and abouts in that mark, that price range. Rolly Stoddart, I think we say, 117k, 12 touches, 6 marks, and he looked fairly well at home. Might be a guy we consider. I think we can get him in the back line from memory. I'd have to double check that. Isaac Heaney was probably a big talking point. We want to see our premiums at least show a bit, particularly guys who haven't had a great pre-season or guys that we feel are still looking to make their way. You know, Heaney's still fairly young despite averaging some great numbers. 14 touches from his 64% time on ground. Some people saying he didn't look super fit or didn't look as good as they would have liked. It's not concerning me. I think keep him in the side, certainly give him the second JLT. And look, I just think the forward line is proving so difficult to pick. And Heaney even showed off a poor pre-season last year that he can start in a blaze of glory. He was fantastic that first month. I think he came back round 5 and looked really good. So I just need him to get through. I didn't see too much of this game. So his 14 touches on paper looks okay. You know, nothing amazing. I don't think he used it overly well. But again, I saw bits and pieces. I wouldn't be getting too worried just off the back of one JLT game. Gold Coast and Geelong, of course, I watched all of this one and wasn't overly impressed. You know, obviously it's just a JLT game, and Geelong had so many of their good players out, not just the big 3 mids, but, you know, Henderson and Taylor as well. We lost by 56 points. Gold Coast certainly showed some real positive signs, not only in their own play, but Nick Holman was a man who put himself even further on the radar. Dominant in the sample. I think he won their medal last year for the best and fairest. 15 touches, 23 years old. He's at 102k in our midfield. And I think Gold Coast, they'll need guys like him, a bit of experience around their youth. And clearly he was purpose-picked. And I wouldn't be surprised to see him in the round 1 side. Will Brodie, 14 touches, 2 clearances. Don't mind if there's an option at all. I think he's sort of around that 180 to 200 mark where there's quite a few first-year draftees. Brodie, of course, in his second year, a high pick last year. Didn't quite get going, had a bit of injury as well. But he looks like he's certainly a guy that's putting his hand up for a bit more midfield time. Cade Kolajasny, just the 5 touches from 58% time on ground. Got to be concerning, to be honest. I just think maybe, you know, he's probably not that popular really, but I think a few guys scan through and go, oh, Kolajasny, you know, he's a running dynamo at the Suns, but maybe his scoring days are over. He just looked like he was destined to be a guy that we'd love in our backlines for years to come. Back in the day, I think, what did he average, 91 or something, and particularly the first half of the year was great, but probably put a line through him. He just doesn't seem to be the same player, or certainly a different role, but anyway, that was interesting. Pierce Hanley. I didn't like what I saw. A bit like Christensen, I wanted to see midfield time, and I didn't see enough of it. 16 touches, 2 contested, just 1 clearance, 3 rebound 50s. What did I see? I saw a reasonable display as a footballer, but all this talk about playing through the midfield, I didn't see it. I saw a guy who was their exit man from the back line. Was certainly a guy that provided a bit of run and carry off the back of the stoppage, but I didn't see him thoroughly in the thick of it too many times, and for me that's a little bit of a concern. That is a little bit of a concern. We'll wait and see. Sometimes clubs give opportunities to the young guys, and then their second JLT match is the real dress rehearsal for round 1, so we'll wait and see. But from what I saw, I didn't like it, so that was interesting. And look, from the Cats' point of view, we had a lot of guys out and there wasn't too much. A few young guys were really impressive. Tim Kelly was the main one. You could lock him in for a round 1 spot. 13 touches. He went off late with a corky, so only 60% time on ground, but just so clean, smooth moving. He's a mature age guy. We picked him. We're in the window, and we picked him with our first pick for a reason. And I think he's definitely in line for a round 1 berth, despite a really strong Geelong midfield. I think he'll definitely find his way on the side. Charlie Constable, 22 touches, 11 contested. Again, a really promising display. I wouldn't think he'd play round 1, but certainly one to keep an eye on perhaps throughout the season. And Sam Meningola, 21 touches, 11 contested. and looked pretty good. I mean, to be fair, again, as I've mentioned about him, my concern is not what he can do, but the guys around him pushing him out a little bit. You know, Dangerfield, Selwood and Ablett and Duncan are all in front of him in our midfield. Can he find enough time in there? Will he be a little bit more forward than he was last year? That's my concern. So we'll wait and see perhaps how it all goes when some of those bigger names are in around him and where he lines up and features. But look, that pretty much sums it up. But plenty of names there, a few guys to think about. I think we learned a little bit. There were definitely some players that put their hand up to take notice, and a few guys that maybe didn't perform how we would have liked. But as always, you've got to put that asterisk next to something like this and be like, look, let's not take JLT practice games too seriously. For some guys, it means more. For some clubs, it means more. So that's something you've got to keep in mind. And I wouldn't be too hastily on your premiums. Don't be seeing a premium go poorly and ditch him. This is all about maybe seeing those mid-price guys or players that we thought might play in this position, and that would help. Just seeing if they are in that mix and actually going on what that article said 2 months ago. So just seeing the proof in the pudding. And if you didn't, like with a Christensen or a Hanley, then you might get concerned. But if you did, well, it reinforces that selection. So that's pretty much what these are about. Wouldn't get too carried away. Certainly once we get 2 games from each club to really have a decent sample size, that's when we can really lock in some definites on where guys are going to line up. So that'll be great in a week or so time. So look, I'll be back pretty soon. I reckon I'll look to have probably a team update for you this week, maybe in the next couple of days, and plenty more player profiles as well. And I know there's a bit of player comparison talk as well, sort of lining up guys in certain positions, and I think that's a good idea. I'll look to do that probably after JLT winds up, because I think you need to get some definites in terms of weighing them up evenly and actually having a genuine say. And I'd like to see a couple of games from each just to make that sort of a call. But yeah, we'll definitely hone in on some closer positions and some players that you might be weighing up in certain spots. So that'll be good to do as well. But look, thanks for tuning in, guys. Obviously these videos are a bit longer, so hopefully you've watched the majority of it or skipped to certain bits that you like. And if you made it from minute 1 to this one, well, thank you very much for sticking out the whole journey. But I'll be back soon, as I said. Subscribe away as always. I'll chat to you soon. Cheers.